Welcome back to Wall Again, and in this episode I'm going to be reviewing the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. But before we get into that, if you're new to my channel and you haven't already subscribed, please hit the subscribe button, and if you could also like, I'd greatly appreciate it. So I'm running a series every Sunday. It's called 60s Sunday, and every Sunday I'll bring you a different album review, so please stay tuned to check that out. Okay, so let's dive in. The Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. So it was the 8th studio album by the band, and it was released in 1967. It was the first album since Revolver the year before, which was 1966. And it's gone on to sell over 32 million albums worldwide, and it's the highest selling Beatles studio album in their back catalogue. It got to number 1 in the USA, UK, Australia, Canada and West Germany. And it's gone 18 times platinum in the UK, 11 times platinum in the US and 6 times platinum in Canada. So the style of this album will be considered like rock and roll, but there's also psychedelic rock, and then there's also some Eastern influences in there as well. A whole fusion of different styles. The cover of the album is very interesting. So this is considered a concept album. So basically Paul McCartney had an idea that he wanted to create alter egos for the members of the band. So he was sick of the Beatles and Beatlemania and all the hype, and he decided he wanted to do a concept album where they wouldn't be the Beatles, they'd be this Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And John and George and Ringo weren't so sure about it, but I suppose they went with it. But Paul had great vision in the band, and this turned out to be a massively successful album. It was produced by George Martin, of course, and the label it was released through was Apple. It was recorded at EMI Studios and Regent Sound in London. And the production style on this album is absolutely groundbreaking. So the band layered track on track on track, and this wasn't so easy as it is now. Obviously, like, we have DAW, digital audio workstations now, like Logic and Pro Tools, and you can easily layer as many instruments as you like. 50, 60, 100, 200, whatever you want, you can layer on. As long as you have enough space on your computer, you can layer on different instruments and sync them up, and it's no big deal. The Beatles didn't have that luxury in the 1960s, so they had to record parts. And I'm not sure if they used a 4-track or an 8-track recorder, but they had to record the number of parts that were limited on the recorder, and then they would have to bounce that down to tape and then go and record again. So for example, if they had 4 parts recorded, they had to commit to those 4 parts, and then they got recorded on 1 track, and then the next they take another 4 parts and they'd record them on the 2nd track. So then you have 8 tracks, and they kept doing this. They kept recording parts and bouncing them down, but what it meant is that they had to commit to a track. So for example, they couldn't change arrangements halfway through, or they'd have to start all over again. So this was a very long process. This had never been done before in popular music or in any music, so it was completely groundbreaking. The band spent 5.5 months in the studio carrying this out, this whole process, and at the time the press and the media were ridiculing the band that they had run out of ideas, because 5.5 months was a long time to spend in the studio back in the 1960s. Usually albums were released very, very quickly. So with the Beatles taking on this monumental task of spending 5.5 months to super produce and analyze their album and record all these different parts and layer them, it was definitely something that wasn't of the time. So the Beatles deserve a lot of credit for that, and I think a lot of people miss that when they talk about, you know, rock and roll music, and maybe they might dismiss the Beatles. But the Beatles were pioneers in a lot of different methods for rock and roll bands that we just consider the norm today. So it was very interesting with how the album came about. Of course, the band lineup for the Beatles, it's always been the same. It's John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr, and various members playing different instruments. So yeah, very, very interesting. There's actually songs sung by each of the four members of the Beatles on this album. So that'll tell you how much input all four members had. This album really pushed the boundaries in terms of sound, as I explained, with the production style, and like they added in so much additional instrumentation like orchestras and stuff like this, and George Martin was pivotal in getting all of that into the mix and sounding good. But they also pushed the boundaries in terms of the visual aspect of an album and the whole visual experience. So in terms of an album sleeve, a record sleeve at the time, instead of just having a boring picture of the band, this was the album cover they came up with. So you can see it's very interesting, it's very colourful. There's so much to take in on this album cover. So you've got the band front and centre wearing costumes. So again, they're in their alter ego there, as Paul McCartney was trying to push. And then if you go around, you've actually got some of the most influential people of the 60s up to that point included here. So I think you've got Marilyn Monroe, you've got Bob Dylan, you've got Marlon Brando. There's actually, as a part of this booklet, you get a list of all the people that are included on the cover, and it's very interesting when you just read through who is actually included in this cover. But it's a fantastic album, and the artwork internally as well is great. I'll just show you some of the artwork. This is the CD version. Obviously, when it came out, it was on vinyl only. So you can see there, that's the photo shoot for the album. This is very interesting. Obviously, we're back in the days of black and white. And then they have colour versions of the band in their attire for the album. All the band, relatively short hair in comparison to what was to come, but all sporting the same type of mustache, handlebars. So yeah, I can only imagine on vinyl what this album was like when it came out, because it would have been groundbreaking. There wouldn't have been anything with so much colour and so much interest to look through while you're listening to this amazing music. So in terms of the music itself, it starts very strong. So the first song is Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, which is the title track, which is a fantastic song. Brilliant rock song, elements of blues guitar in there, orchestra. It's just a fantastic arrangement, and that goes straight into With a Little Help from My Friends, which is sung by Ringo, and is an extremely popular Beatles song. But the thing about these songs is there's no gap, so they don't stop Sgt. Pepper's and then start With a Little Help from My Friends with the usual 2-second gap in between the songs. They run one straight into the other, and I think this was fantastic. And this paved the way for the likes of Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, Rush, bands who wanted to go in a direction where they were taking the 20 minutes of one side of vinyl, and they wanted to create a masterpiece of music that ran the whole way through. This really set the scene for all those guys to follow the template. So I thought that was very interesting. Then the next track is Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, which is an excellent track. So off the bat, you're getting 3 top-notch songs, 3 of the Beatles' best songs on the start of the album. And then we get Getting Better, which is a brilliant song. Really, really good. And then the album takes a little bit of a dip. So we've got songs like Fixing a Hole, we've got She's Leaving Home, and Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite. So it takes a small dip there. Then we have the George Harrison song, Within You, Without You. And following that, we have the classic When I'm 64, followed by Lovely Rita, then Good Morning, Good Morning. There's a Sgt. Pepper's reprise where they come back into the song that opened the album. And then it closes with one of the Beatles' best songs that they've ever written. It's called A Day in the Life. and this is one of the classic Beatles songs. When you talk about the styles of John Lennon and Paul McCartney mixed together, the song starts off with, like, I suppose the history in the song, John Lennon was writing the song, his parts of the song, as one piece, and Paul McCartney wrote a different piece, and then they decided to join them together. So the song it's a bit strange in that there's two completely different moods. So John Lennon starts with the section, I heard the news today, oh boy, the English army had just won the war. And that's really like somber, and it really sounds like a John Lennon classic. And then it goes into Paul McCartney's woke up, get out of bed, that part, which is very upbeat, very poppy. And that runs, and then it goes back into the John Lennon section again. So you're getting this juxtaposition between Lennon, McCartney, and it's just fantastic. One of the Beatles' best songs, and it ends the album. So really, really interesting, and really, really great music there. So all in all, I think in terms of the songs on the album, there definitely is a dip in the middle for me. Like, the first 4 songs are fantastic and the last song is fantastic, but in the middle there, I don't think the songs stand up to that standard. So if it was based on music alone, I don't know if this album would be as highly rated as it is. I think the fact that it's groundbreaking in terms of production styles and sound, and also in terms of the visual aspect, the visual art, I think those elements really crank this album up a gear, and that's why I'm going to give it 9 out of 10. I think it's one of these massively cultural significant albums, and I think it deserves to have a high mark. But if someone's listening to it on Spotify, they might not appreciate how good the album is and how groundbreaking the album was when it came out. I think to really appreciate this album, you really need to do a little bit of research and understand the times and what the album was all about and what elements the album pioneered. Then you probably need to go and look at the visual art on the album, on the record itself, and then go listen to the album while looking at the visual art, and then you get the whole message of what was happening at the time and the significance of this album. So it wouldn't be my favourite Beatles album, to be honest, in terms of music, but certainly it's an iconic album, and you can't deny the impact that this album has had on rock and roll, progressive rock, psychedelic rock, whatever you might call it, different styles of music. Okay, I hope you enjoyed the video. And as I said, this is part of 60s Saturday, where I'll be reviewing an album from the 1960s. Sunday. Each Sunday I'll be reviewing an album from the 1960s. So stay tuned for that. I also release a video every day on different genres of music, reviewing albums. So if you enjoyed Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, please let me know in the comments below. Or if you didn't like it, if you think it's overrated, please let me know. I'd love to hear your feedback. And if you enjoyed this video, there's also some other videos on my page that you can look at. I'll leave some links here. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you on the next one. Bye now.